Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on partnering for sustainability. We're going to start by talking about the increasing importance of partnerships, and I'd like to share with you some data that has to do with the research we did to prepare for this presentation. We looked at the management journals and the public administration and public policy journals from the period 2000 to 2012. And as you can see on the picture and the graph on the left-hand side of the slide, there's been a substantial increase in the number of articles published on partnering. And this is in both fields, although in the management literature there's a slightly larger increase. So we had a lot of articles to work with, and I'll review in more detail how we did the study in just a moment. On the right-hand side, we found a quote from The Economist, a recent article in November 2013 from The Economist that suggests that even though there are a large number of partnerships, they're not all successful. In fact, they are suggesting that partnerships are only 50% successful. So as we go through this presentation, we'll definitely be talking about what are some of the reasons why partnerships succeed or fail. When we began the study, we were interested in the practical aspects of partnerships for sustainability, and so our research question reflects this. What are the best practices for firms to collaborate with other organizations to advance sustainable business? And within that, we had some sub-research questions that had to do with specific things like what different partnership forms are there, and how do the forms affect outcomes? What are the processes that are used to promote consensus, and how should partnerships be evaluated? And I'll be speaking to all three of these questions as the presentation proceeds. We began our search with a number of keywords such as green partnerships, partnerships for sustainability, multi-sector partnerships, etc., and netted about 397 articles. And of these, after sorting through to see what they really produced, we found 276 that were relevant for our purposes for this study. We coded all of those articles to learn more about the specifics involved, and the ideas that we coded for are there in the small bulleted items. We talked about who the partners were, what type of partnership it was, what caused the partners to become involved, their interaction processes, and their outcomes. And we'll be talking about many of those things as we go through this presentation. In terms of motivations, for example, from the business perspective, there were a wide variety of motivations that partners brought to the partnerships. Innovation and learning were among those, a key outcome that partners wanted to achieve. But other things like improving their corporate social responsibility reputation, maintaining their legitimacy or their license to operate, were also high on the list of outcomes that business seeks from partnerships. Regulating their industry was another, and interestingly, becoming more attractive to potential employees or to retain employees that they currently have. So for businesses, there are a number of ways in which partnerships can provide added advantage. From the standpoint of other sectors, a large reason for participating in partnerships was to have a voice in the future decisions that are being made about our world. They were also interested in establishing norms for how governments would operate. So governments in particular were interested in establishing a wide array of partnerships that would involve many stakeholders so that they too could have legitimacy. And of course, producing sustainability gains is on the minds of all the partners in some form or another. And then making sure that the solutions that were created through the partnerships are appropriate to the culture of the nation or the part of the world in which the solutions are being implemented. A couple negative outcomes were also key in the literature and repeated many times. And of course, perhaps the biggest one from the standpoint of both NGOs and business was the perception of greenwashing. Businesses have been accused of saying that they're doing something for sustainability but not really following through, and NGOs were concerned about being allied with businesses that were not really, did not really have good corporate social responsibility reputations. So reputational issues are an important part of how the partnership is designed. A second negative outcome was a potential loss of intellectual property. And in this case, this needs to be negotiated very carefully during the partnership negotiations. This next slide shows the 4 sectors that we were interested in who are partnering, and looks at a wide variety of ways in which partnerships could be constructed. Business, NGOs, government, and community are the 4 sectors. And when you combine just 2 of these, such as business and NGOs, you get a dyadic partnership, a business-NGO partnership in that case. Or if NGOs are partnering with community members, one term for that are sustainable local enterprise networks. When government and community partner, we have community planning. And a more traditional form of partnership that's been around for some time is business working with government in public-private partnerships. Perhaps of more interest in this study were the multi-sector partnerships. And there are a variety of forms that these can take, including roundtables, policy dialogues where the group makes recommendations to a governing agency, collaborative governance where the government actually seats the different stakeholders and involves them either in drafting or in implementing tasks that government is charged with. Co-management is a form of collaborative governance related primarily to resources, natural resources, and transnational networks which span the globe and bring partners together around a variety of issues. So you can see there are many forms that partnerships can take, and in this next chart, we're actually diagramming some of the specific types that I just mentioned. And they're mapped here on 2 dimensions. On the x-axis, we map the scope of the partnership. So in the far left-hand side, we have very simple partnerships of 2 parties. And as you move to the right, we increase in the number of sectors that are included in the larger problem area. So something global would be on the right-hand side, whereas a simple philanthropic initiative between a business and an NGO would be in the far left-hand, lower left-hand corner. On the y-axis, we have shared responsibility for the partnership. And as this increases, then the partnerships also become more complex. So moving from the bottom left to the top right, we see that the partnerships are increasing both in their complexity, but also in their transformational potential. If you look at the gray-colored stripes, the light gray in the lower left-hand corner is described as a reactive partnership, perhaps an effort by a business to improve on its corporate social reputation, which may have been tarnished. As you move upward, the partnerships become more and more valuable in terms of sustainability. So a transactional partnership in the medium gray, the second from the left, excuse me, would involve an exchange between an NGO and a business, for example. Perhaps competencies are exchanged, perhaps a new product is developed, or a change in some practices of the business. But when we get up to the far right-hand, upper right-hand corner, we see collaborative governance and base of the pyramid strategies. These are the most complex forms of partnerships, and they perhaps have the largest potential also to transform the sustainability of our world. In the next slide, I'm going to show you some examples of each of these. So if you start again in the lower left-hand corner, of a philanthropic partnership between Timberland and City Year involved the exchange of some shoes to needy children. Timberland donated a large number of shoes to the City Year project. As we go up on the left-hand side, you can see the Rabobank and FOE example. This was a sustained dyadic partnership in which Rabobank worked first with WWN, the World Wildlife Fund, and then FOE, Friends of the Earth in the Netherlands, to actually transform its criteria for the loans that it made to make them more climate friendly. And then as we move across, again, at the top of the chart, we see the Boreal Forest Conservation Initiative, which is going on now in Canada, a form of collaborative governance. I'm going to talk about that one in a little bit more detail so that you can get an idea of some of the aspects of managing a large initiative like collaborative governance. In this case, there were a large number of partners, many environmental groups, Greenpeace among them. Greenpeace was very interested in getting this partnership started from the get-go. And the partners included many timbering companies in Canada, across Canada, wherever Canada has what's called boreal forest. And of particular interest here were the caribou who live in these forests and the protection of the forest for those populations of caribou. The initiative's primary goal was to protect the habitat of the caribou while still allowing for economic well-being of the communities involved. It involved the suspension of logging in 29 million hectares of Canadian forest, and it's an ongoing initiative that involves many communities. So the agreement was initially a high-level agreement among the parties, and now it's being taken to specific forests for operationalization and additional collaboration among the particular stakeholders in each location. Two aspects of managing partnerships are illustrated well by this particular initiative. The first is that it's important to establish accountability for the goals of the partnership. And in order to do that, these partners hired KPMG to evaluate the partnership. And they have published a report after the first year of the partnership, which mapped the partnership's success against the objectives and suggested that the partnership was a little behind in achieving some of its core objectives. Their second report is not available yet that I'm aware of, but if you're interested in this partnership, you may be watching for that. A second feature of this partnership that I think is particularly instructive for the design of partnerships has to do with what they called the Undercurrents Forum. The Undercurrents Forum was a place where conflicts that arose during the partnership proceedings could be worked out. And what's interesting here is that the partners realized that they were probably going to have some of these conflicts. This is endemic to many partnerships because the partners are coming from different worldviews and perspectives. And so this Undercurrents Forum was used to air out conflicts and to resolve issues throughout the life of this partnership, which began in 2010. I'm moving on now to make a distinction between collaboration and partnerships. Many people will use these terms interchangeably when in fact the collaboration term has a very distinct meaning. And oftentimes partnerships which fail because they did not develop a collaboration among the partners. So we want to talk about, in this section of the webinar, we want to talk about what is key to a good outcome and how do you achieve collaboration. Specifically, collaboration occurs among the partners when they can find a consensus agreement, when they develop shared norms and rules for how they're going to work together. And to do this, it often involves accepting trade-offs in order to produce the joint gains that both parties want. I'll be elaborating on each of these points as we go through the next couple of slides. Again, because the partners are bringing different abilities, they need to explore their differences. They need to find out what each one can contribute that the other one might be able to learn. And finally, they need to assume the joint risks and responsibilities for seeing the partnership through. So if partners aren't willing to take some risks, then their partnership probably won't be as successful as they'd like. In this diagram and the next two, we're going to be showing you how partnerships can fail and how they might succeed. So if you look at the two axes in this diagram, you'll see that on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, we have business goals. So I'm using here a business NGO partnership to illustrate. On the bottom x-axis, we have the NGO goals. And in the area of maroon on the chart, you'll see that it says partnership fails. What this means is that below the minimum goals indication on each axis, the partnership would not succeed because one or the other or both partners have not met their goals. A partnership that ends up at the white dot that says compromise or minimal benefit would just minimally succeed in making each partner succeed at reaching some of its goals. But the potential for collaboration is much greater. And if you look at the wedge area that moves outward and upward to the left from the compromise point, you'll see that out on the curve it says greatest collaboration, greatest benefit. And so it's within this pie-shaped wedge that we're trying to locate the partnership. And the successful partnerships would be out there on that, what we're going to call the Pareto optimal frontier. Here's the same picture again with a little more detail, and you'll see that in the mauve-colored or pink-colored area to the left, business here would not necessarily succeed in making a partnership successful, and in the mauve area going across the bottom of the partnership, NGOs would not necessarily succeed because the other partner isn't able to meet their goals. So while the NGO might be happy with an agreement in that area along the bottom, business wouldn't agree. And while business might be happy with an agreement in the mauve area, the vertical mauve area, the NGO wouldn't agree. So we're looking at agreements that fall within the light blue area. And as I mentioned, the further out we can go toward that arc, the greater success the partnership will have in finding an agreement that both parties are able to be satisfied with. Again, here's the same picture, only rotated a little bit to the left. And what you can see now is that we're stressing within the blue wedge-shaped piece the zone of possible agreement, or what in negotiations we call the ZOPA. And in this area, a partnership could form. Partnerships that were skewed over to the right-hand side, that where the arrow says possible agreements that favor partner, that would be an agreement that favors the NGO. And over on the left-hand side, an agreement that falls close to the shaded area, the lighter blue shaded area, would be an agreement that favors business. But still, either of those would be an agreement that the partner theoretically could sign on to. And if the parties do reach an agreement within this wedge-shaped area, then the positive outcomes that we talked about, innovation, societal benefits, learning new competencies, and other kinds of outcomes that the partners desire from the partnership are more likely to be realized. So this is a way of thinking about how to best achieve a partnership, and it involves trade-offs, and it involves the design of an effective process and the choice of the right partner. So now we're going to turn our attention to the factors that will affect outcomes. There are many drivers encouraging partnerships to form. Among those, as I said before, is a lack of resources. Governments are seeking other partners because they can no longer accomplish all of their required tasks on their own. Businesses are taking on the challenge of sustainability and realizing that they need additional skills and help. And so there are many things driving the partners to form partnerships. We're going to concentrate in particular here on partnership and partner characteristics and process issues, because all of these will affect whether or not the outcomes that the partners are looking for are actually achieved. Looking first at selecting the right partner. So these are the partner characteristics that we're looking at. Is the partner known for being confrontational or being cooperative? And this is particularly important in selecting an NGO with whom to work. Some NGOs are designed to be campaigners. So Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth are typically in this category. And while they may sit at a collaborative table, their primary way of working is to call other stakeholders' attention to problems that they believe need to be solved. So do you want to have a cooperative or a confrontational partner? Interestingly, many of the partnerships that were indicated on the chart were initiated by confrontational partners. But an interesting combination is to have both a confrontational and a cooperative partner at the table. So it's important to think about that if you're a business who's trying to select an NGO to partner with. The second thing would be the competencies and the resource profile that the partner brings. Obviously, businesses can often bring more financial resources to the partnership than NGOs could. But NGOs bring other competencies. They have connections to the community where the business may want to be working, or they may have particular expertise in some aspect of sustainability that the business itself hasn't been able to develop. So again, scanning to see which competencies your partner has and which ones you don't have is an important way to begin a partnership. Partnership experience is also another criteria. Some NGOs have worked with countless other organizations, and others may be new to partnering. It's important to think about which partners you want to work with, whether you're an NGO or whether you're a business or your government, to think about what partnership experience they have and what their track record is. Have they been successful? Are they in partnerships that have fallen apart? And to find out something about that history. Some of the other issues that are increasingly important in selecting a partner have to do with cultural fit. Sometimes partners have very different organizational cultures, and when they get to the table, they find out that it's difficult to mesh their differing cultures. Also, national cultures. There are major differences, for example, in how apology is made in different cultures. And not having an awareness of these kind of things can derail a partnership. Partners' time horizons may be different. The power dynamics operating at the table are important to consider as well. This goes back to the issue of voice that we talked about earlier. Stakeholders want to have some say in the partnership, and if the power dynamics are such that their voice is not being heard, the partnership is likely to not succeed. And finally, representational issues. Who should be at the table? Are you considering all the partners who are going to be affected by the decisions that the partnership is making? In terms of process characteristics, there are several some of which we've already mentioned, that are critical to partnership success. Exploring differences we've already discussed, because the partners typically do bring different vantage points and worldviews. But this is the advantage of a partnership as well, if you can capitalize on these. We talked about the importance of handling conflict and actually setting up a process, as in the case of the Boreal Forest Initiative, to anticipate that conflicts are going to arise and to make sure that there are built-in procedures that both parties understand for how to work through those conflicts. We've talked about sharing power and voice. We didn't talk too much about finding a shared vision, but unless the partnership can identify something that both partners care about, it's not likely to get off the ground very far. Agreeing on norms for both how to behave at the table and norms for what each organization is going to do is another important aspect of the process. Building consensus is inherent in partnerships, and as we saw in the diagrams about finding a consensus agreement within the zone of agreement, the more that the partners can find consensus by trading off what's important to one for what's less important or costless to the other, the more likely the partnership will succeed. Cultivating leadership is important, and some organizations who have partnered a lot have actually identified their partnership specialists. So this is something to think about for your own organization. Are there people in our organization who are better at collaborating than others, and might they be the ones we want to involve in these partnerships? And finally, I spoke about creating accountability and the importance of finding some way to evaluate how we're doing against the benchmarks that we've set. All of these things, including building trust, will produce the kind of outcomes, or help to produce the kind of outcomes that the partnership was formed to create in the first place. If some of these things are not present, then the success of the partnership will probably be diminished importantly, or perhaps the partnership will fail completely. So there are a few recommendations that we identified for all partners and a few specifically for business. And if you're looking at this from the vantage point of an NGO or from a government, in the report we've identified a number of other recommendations for all of the parties. So from the standpoint of recommendations for business, think about the design and the process that you want to use for partnering. Failure to do this is likely to produce a failed partnership, or one with a lot of rocky meetings along the way. Framing the partnership as a learning process, this is something that all the parties should bring to the table, and something that you would want to investigate from the standpoint of your partner. What does your partner want to learn from this process, and what do you want to learn? We've talked about constructing fair processes and managing conflicts, ensuring voice for everyone. Again, some stakeholders who perhaps bring less power to the table don't want to be there unless they can ensure that they're going to have a strong voice in the process. Evaluation criteria should be set early on in the process, not at the end, because then one party may feel that it's disadvantageous to them. The two-table problem is something we haven't discussed, but it's important to think about whether the representatives to the partnership have the ability to speak for their organization, or whether they need to go back and get affirmation from others in their organization that the agreements reached at the table are satisfactory for them. Ideally, the partners would have that authority, but if they don't, you want to know that early rather than later in the process, because that can erode trust if partners believe you have the authority and then you say at the last minute, oh, I'm sorry, but I have to go back and get ratification from others in my organization. If you do, then the design should include a mechanism for each organization to get that ratification before a final agreement is signed. And finally, we talked about the importance of developing leaders with competence in partnering skills. For businesses in particular, it's important to evaluate whether you've selected the correct partner for the objectives that you have. And it's important to consult a wide array of stakeholders. You may want to have meetings with many different partners before settling on which one is the most valuable for your purposes. And involving stakeholders early in the process is also an important recommendation. There were many examples of partnerships where business went out too late to find a partner when they had already made decisions that had negative repercussions for the community or the partners that they wanted to join up with, and this didn't help them to create an easy partnership going forward. So the key findings from our study: choose a partner wisely, think about and design an effective process for the partnership so that you can collaborate rather than fail to collaborate. Search for joint and balance gains, and this means that you involve trade-offs. You're going to have to provide your partners with opportunities to benefit from the partnership as well. And see if you can meet at least the minimum goals, if not better than the minimum goals, of all of the partners. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope that these kinds of suggestions will help you improve upon the partnerships that you're involved in or entice you to begin some of your own. Thank you very much.